Thank you all for being here. I got to tell you, my heart feels good when the room's packed, so thank you very much. For those of you who are here as guests, but also for anyone in student media, if you can please turn your phones off or silence them and just keep our attention focused on a wonderful opportunity we have to engage today with a very distinguished guest. I would like to start by just introducing what Student Media Presents is about and why we're here today, and then I will introduce the person who will introduce for us. Student Media Presents started 2 years ago under the premise that this entire campus and this entire community really needed to be engaged in the discussion of giving voice to those who otherwise would go unheard on our campus or in our community. And I can tell you that there's large numbers of those people who otherwise go without being heard. And that really is student media's purpose, is to give voice to the student population on this campus, and in particular to those students who might otherwise not get a chance to be heard by students and in their positions. We have a lot of opportunities on this campus to hear from our administrators and from our faculty, but being heard as a student can sometimes be a difficult process because you might be at a different age or a different rank or a different place in life, and to just have your voice heard is a very difficult place to be. This year, we are in a time of unprecedented change on this campus that goes back to World War II, in that we are welcoming home a population of students who would otherwise go unheard, and that is our enlisted service student, or our returning students who are enlisted or who have served our population somehow or another in the military. And so today we are honored to bring a guest to our campus who will allow us to give voice to that voiceless population of almost 1,000 students. We've joined our efforts today to bring our guest in with the Veterans Services Department for Student Affairs. And so I hope that you'll welcome Gus Bedwell with me, and he will introduce our guest for us today. Gus.
Thank you, Julia. So it's my privilege and honor to introduce you to Major General Jeffrey S. Buchanan, Deputy Commander General of the First Corps. Major General Buchanan commissioned as an infantry officer in May of 1982 after graduating from the University of Arizona. July 2010 to December 2011, Major General Buchanan was Director of Strategic Effects, J9, U.S. Forces, Iraq, and he is currently serving as the Deputy Commander General of I-Corps, Joint Base Lewis-McChord. Please welcome Major General Buchanan.
Thanks. Well, good afternoon. I want to, first of all, thank all of you for being here. You need to know it's a great honor for me, actually, to be here to get to talk to you and hopefully get to learn something from you, get to listen to you, as well as having me just talk. It's a great opportunity to talk to a group of people, and you're fairly varied, but a group of people who I think are some of the most important people who are going to shape the future of our country and actually safeguard democracy and the ideals of democracy in our country. We have members of the military here, we have veterans, but we also have students and faculty from the university at large, and those who are maybe journalism majors, members of the media. I think you all play an extremely important role. And like I said, I've been looking forward to it because I want to learn, as well as maybe play a role in teaching or helping you get going with some ideas on a couple of key important points. One of the focal points for my talk, the comments that I'll make, was going to be the relationship between the military and the media. I'd also like to talk to you a little bit about what I think the role is of a free press in a nascent democracy, and I saw that firsthand over a number of years in Iraq. And then I'd also like to talk to you a little bit about what we're trying to do at Joint Base Lewis-McChord with respect to some of our relationships. I hope to just talk for about 15 minutes. It might go a little bit longer. but I'd like to save the bulk of the time for question and answer, and I would ask you to fire away with anything you want to ask. And frankly, if there's something I don't want to answer, I just won't answer it. But you know, the theme for my talk today really has to do about trust. Really has to do with trust. And you know, trust to me is established between people, and it's based on a level of confidence. You know, one can have all the integrity of the world, and somebody else can have all the integrity of the world, but there can still be this lack of trust if they don't have confidence in each other. And so I think confidence or this trust is critical for a relationship between the military and the media. Now, what I'd like to talk to you about is where we have come from in this relationship and where I think we are now, broadly speaking, and where we might be headed in the future. But I'd also like to offer some thoughts about if you're in the military or if you're representing the media, some of the kinds of things that you might need to do to build trust. And I think it's critical that you do that. And regardless of where you come from, it's very, very important. Okay, so first of all, if Gus mentioned that I was commissioned University of Arizona, thanks for the football game a couple of weeks ago. But Gus mentioned that I was commissioned from University of Arizona in 1982. And I started going to college in 1977. Yes, I was on a 5-year plan. But at that time, most of my ROTC instructors, in fact, all of my ROTC instructors had been Vietnam veterans. And so there's a very significant influence on campus from the tail end, if you will, of Vietnam. The Vietnam War ended actually in 1975, and I started going to school in 1977. So as far as that relationship and what was going on in the relationship between the military and the media was, I guess, one that I could characterize as being probably the worst that our country has ever seen. And there was this breakdown in trust. And there's a lot of good reasons for it. And it didn't matter which side of the equation one was on, there was a lot of good reason not to have confidence that in the person who was wearing a different suit. There's certainly some exceptions. And one of the most notable is the relationship between a young reporter named Joe Galloway and an entire battalion from the 1st Cavalry Division in the Adrang Valley in 1965. And some of you may have read the book or seen the movie, We Were Soldiers Once and Young, but that's really stemmed from that relationship. But I've got to tell you that was a unique relationship, and it was certainly not the norm. So there was this breakdown in trust. And I wasn't taught intentionally, don't trust the press, but I will tell you, one learns from others' actions, and what I learned from my first 10 or 15 years in the military was that if the press comes around, you should do everything you can to avoid them. And they are not to be trusted, and we are not to trust them with our secrets. Now, it wasn't ever explicitly taught. But again, one learns from how others behave, and that's what I saw my leaders doing. I think that takes us forward. If you go back to the years around 1990, 1991, when we had Operation Desert Shield and Desert Storm, there was a new program, and it's called Military Embeds. And the program was essentially about bringing embedded reporters, or bringing reporters and linking them in with members of the military. They joined a unit, if you will, and they stayed with them. And so as essentially as members of the unit, they stayed with a particular unit and reported from the eyes of that unit for a number of operations. They may stay with the unit for a period of weeks. And then it was tried out first back then. It expanded greatly after the events of 9/11, September 11th of 2001. And from a military perspective, we thought this was great benefit because now actually we found a great, we were able to build a lot of trust between reporters and of all types of media, print reporters, television, et cetera, between those reporters and the members of the military. And we felt that what the members of the media were getting was the truth. They weren't just seeing the good, but they were seeing everything, good and bad. And because they stayed with a unit long enough, they could build those relationships and really understand what was going on. But there was a little bit of a backlash from the media perspective. It worked very, very well early on, but later on, I think there was probably a development of suspicion or lack of trust. You've gone native, or these kinds of things, because the reporters had stayed with those military units for a period of weeks in some cases. They had their lives were saved in some cases by these soldiers that they were there with. So there's a very strong bond between the members of the unit, all services, and the military. So even though we were headed towards building better trust than we had in the past, there was still some suspicion. And eventually the military wanted to keep pushing this idea of an embed because we got what we thought were, the most cynical person would say that we got what we thought was positive stories, but I think at least the more adult approach was to say we got the truth out there. We didn't just get a series of snapshots based on a certain observation. If you had a reporter with the unit for a couple of weeks, you thought you were going to get the truth and you were going to get the fair shake, and they were going to get to know Private Jones, which one could argue is one of our greatest storytellers. It's not just a guy of a rank like me who's up giving briefings to the press. The story can really be told by the privates and the sergeants and the lieutenants. So we thought it was a pretty powerful program. And from the military perspective, we wanted to hang on to that. And then, of course, the media and the producers wanted to start to pull out of that. Well, look, we've completed the initial evasion. At this point in time, it's not helpful to take one of my reporters, whether they're from the New York Times or Associated Press or CNN, and then keep them with a particular unit for 2 weeks because there's stories to tell all over the place. So then there's this new tension that developed over time. So anyway, we've gotten better since Vietnam, but there are still some tensions there. And what I'd like to do is just share a couple of vignettes from some of my tours in Iraq. First one goes back to 2005, and I was a brigade commander, and I was a combat advisor for the Iraqi Special Police Commandos. And I spent a lot of time all over the country doing a lot of operations. So I had opportunities from time to time to meet with reporters from different media outlets. And for the most part, I had positive exchanges. Of course, I was asked hard questions from time to time, but they were positive. But I had one particular incident that was not a positive exchange, and in fact, we went out of our way. I'm not going to tell you the reporter, wouldn't be appropriate, but we went out of our way to take care of this person and help tell the story that the person wanted to tell by linking them up with key Iraqi individuals. We took that person all over Baghdad. 2005 and 6 was not a safe time to drive all over Baghdad. In the end, they didn't have to come to Iraq to tell the story they wanted to tell. All they wanted to do, my judgment is they wanted to use the backdrop of here I am in Iraq to tell a story that was really 2 months old and discarded completely the information that could have been gleaned. So what it did for me personally was reinforce my stereotype. The media may not be fully trusted. And then we go to my third tour in Iraq. I was there in 2008 and 2009. And at this point in time, I was a deputy commander of a division and serving in central and southern Iraq. And at that time, I had an opportunity to spend quite a bit of time with reporters because of my rank, more than anything. They wanted to know what was going on. And I've got to say, my personal experiences with everybody from, from media reporters to live interviews on television or radio, television reporters, written press, and a little bit on the Iraqi press, were all pretty positive. And so it started to wear down my guard, my personal guard that I had in this relationship. And then we flash forward to 2010, and I get this call. I'd been back from Iraq 7 months at the time, and I got this call that said, "Hey, we're looking at you to be the J9 or Director of Strategic Effects for U.S. Forces Iraq." I said, "Great, what's that?" So they explained it, and then eventually, after they were explaining a little while, I said, "You mean the press conference guy?" And yeah, so I was going to do a number of different things, but one of them was to be the spokesman for U.S. Forces Iraq, which I couldn't understand why I would do that. I was an infantryman. I had no background in public affairs, but I had a pretty smart guy pull me aside and say, "Look, this isn't about being smooth. It's not about being somebody who can schmooze other people or anything like that. It's about informing people and trying to get the truth out." So I had a lot of questions about why me, but in the process, one of the things that I learned was that I had credibility because I had been there before. And what I could do, if I did it poorly, was lose my credibility. And so it was up to me to try to keep the credibility that I had just by walking into the job because of previous experience. And so one of the most important lessons I got was you have to work to build trust. You have credibility right now. If you don't work hard at it, you're going to lose it, and you have to work to build trust. So here's my prescription, if you will, especially for members of the military and the media, but I think it's even broader than that about building trust. The first is you have to understand the culture. If I'm in the military, I need to understand the culture, or if I'm in the military, I need to understand the culture of the members of the media that I'm dealing with. And there's a different culture for different types of media, print versus television, international versus U.S. Of course, different media outlets. Is there a difference between Fox and MSNBC? Yeah. So if you work to understand the culture, I think that's one of the most foundational things that can be out there. On the media side, you got to work to understand the culture of the military, and it's not. You can't look at all of us and say we're all exactly the same. We have a colonel here from the Air Force, and I'm in the Army, and we have different cultures, subcultures, if you will, within the military. If you're working with the State Department, they have a very different culture than the military. Even how they deal with the media. When I was the spokesman in Iraq, I used to think that the best spokesmen that I had were actually our 50,000 troops we still had there. And if we did a good job keeping them informed, they'd do great. Far, far more centralized in the State Department on who they allow engage with the media. So it's a cultural issue. So that's the first thing, is understand the culture. Second is you got to work to forge relationships. And relationships are personal and they're human. Now, the example that I would give is that I was generally always on the record, but I was willing to go off the record once I had a relationship with a particular reporter. And that was where I actually learned some of the most important things, as well as maybe they could get me to speculate. And if they wanted to, hey, what do you think about something? What do you think is going to happen after the elections? What do you think is going to happen after U.S. forces leave? I could do that off the record. And it was pretty powerful, but I wouldn't do it unless I trusted the individual. And the reason that's important to have that dialogue is we can learn from each other. And in the end, what I was doing was actually helping them to think about, okay, where do I want to go with this in the future? They couldn't use anything I was saying if it was off the record, but it was actually some of the most important dialogue. The third is to admit mistakes. We're all human and we all make mistakes. And so whether you're a reporter or a member of the military, you're going to make mistakes. When that happens, you need to admit that, in fact, you did so, because if you don't, it's going to cause a breakdown in that relationship and that level of trust. And then lastly, and kind of above all, which could probably be mentioned first, is maintain your values. You know, on the Army side, of course, we have a series of values. The Air Force has values, the Navy does, but you have values. You know, there are important things to being a student at Oregon State University. There's important things to being members of the military. There's important things to being a reporter in whatever organization you're in. There's values there, and you need to maintain those and not compromise them. So I'm going to shift gears just a little bit and go to the role of the free press in a nascent democracy. You know, I think in the military we learned, especially after our experience in the Balkans, that democracy is a heck of a lot more complicated than having an election. You can't just host an election and expect democracy to spring up all over the place. Some of this is obviously shaped by culture. And if we look at Iraq specifically, I would make a pretty strong argument, and we can go into this in question and answer, but we did not have a good understanding of the Iraqi culture when we started the operation in 2003. So democracy is more complicated than that. It's more than just having elections. It's actually got to be built on a foundation of values. And if you look at Iraq, you know, the idea that the people are responsible for the government and that the government should be accountable to the people, those kinds of ideas were never present there, had never been present. And oh, by the way, the role that a free press plays in holding the government accountable to the people had never been present. So what we tried to do was help the Iraqi people bring about democracy, but it was forced, really starting with the Constitution and the election process, and it was not built on a foundation of values. Now, I think those values are in fact developing. They are growing, but they didn't exist in 2003. And you know, you take a country that's been under the Ba'ath Party rule for 35 years, they had a very different set of values, and they'd been forced to live a certain way that we couldn't change overnight. I think it is changing, but it is not done, and it's going to be a growth. And when my Iraqi friends would ask me occasionally, "Hey, well, you guys have solved democracy," and I said, "No, you know, we're only a couple hundred years old. We're still working at it." And I think it always does need to be a work in progress. But I do think that those values are starting to take root, but we're not there yet. Now, when I look at particular programs, the United States government, on the military side, on the State Department side, we had a lot of programs to help build and help get a free press jump-started in Iraq. But I have made the argument a number of times that actually the biggest determinant of potentially having a future free press in Iraq was the Western media, because they showed the Iraqi government what could happen. They showed the art of the possible when it came to how one could behave with the press, and yes, in fact, we can be trusted. You can help us to help you, essentially. They showed the Iraqi press what it means to be loyal to your values and not to back down. But again, the Iraqi government was, in my opinion, pretty clumsy with how they dealt with their own media a number of times. And I think they're getting better, but it's a work in progress, and they certainly don't have the same standards you'd find in the United Kingdom or somewhere like that. The last point I'd like to make before we really turn it over, before I'd like to turn it over to you for questions, is really this key idea of trust and how important it is to everything we do within the military. And I've got to be honest with you, one of the reasons I'm here today is to build a relationship, to get a relationship going, and to start working on that relationship and maybe even build some trust. We have the potential in the military with being disconnected from our society, from our country. I don't know if any of you saw the piece in Time. I think it was last year. They were talking about a separation between the military and the rest of the country, and you know, that would be a grave mistake. We can't afford it. You can't afford it. We in the military can't afford it. We have to stay connected. So one reason I came down from Joint Base Lewis-McChord, kind of near between Tacoma and Olympia today, was was to get this relationship going, and hopefully we can actually expand it, because I think we do need to be connected. That idea, that trust, applies also to our mission at First Corps and what we're doing today. I know a number, and again, you can ask me questions about this. I won't go into details now, but a number of you have been reading about what's been described as a shift to the Pacific. In our case, what we call it is a rebalance to the Pacific. Well, we're at First Corps, where I come from, that's our mission. We've spent a lot of energy over the last 10 years in the Middle East, but we're now being told, and we welcome it, look to the West. Look to the Pacific. That's where we need to spend our energy. And it's a vital region, very, very important to the United States, economically, militarily, but we know that we have to work on trust. From a U.S. military, even within the U.S. military, the Pacific has been largely a Navy theater for many years, and where has the Army been for the last 10 years? In Iraq and Afghanistan. So we have to, on the Army side, we have to work to build trust with our Navy brothers and sisters to say, yes, in fact, we are going to be here for you. It also goes to the trust we have to build with all the partner nations. Now, we have great relationships with many, many countries. In fact, we have bilateral security treaties, mutual defense treaties with 5 of the nations in the Pacific. But we've got to work to maintain their trust. And we've got to reach out to others, Vietnam, China, to actually build a level of trust. And so the same prescription applies about understanding culture, forging those relationships, admitting mistakes, and then maintaining their values. And lastly, I think that we've got to reach out to all of our neighbors in the Pacific Northwest. We've done, from a joint base Lewis-McChord perspective, we've done a pretty good job with Tacoma and Olympia. We haven't the further away you get. And we're a fairly important base. You know, we have 40,000 troops there. We brought $6 billion to the economy last year in that part of Washington. But we don't necessarily have great relationships with those away from the reservation because we haven't reached out to them. So we need to do that. And again, I think we need to build trust. And it's on us to start working to build those relationships. So in any case, I'll just close it with saying, or close my comments with saying, I think trust is critical. Trust is critical to the relationship we in the military have with members throughout this, or other members of our country, regardless of where they are, with leaders in a university, like you all are, with our partners in the Pacific, and certainly between members of the press and members of the military. I think trust is critical. It's on all of us to work to build that. And if we don't, you know, we'll end up paying the price. So, with that, let me turn it over to you for any questions you might have.
Hi, my name is Kurt Hagan. So, I appreciate you coming by, and I was wondering what, on the flip side, on the other side, what do you think makes a good reporter?
Well, I think I'll give a couple of thoughts here. First of all, if you go back to the values, I think one has to have values, and you need to know who you're working for, and you've got to maintain loyalty to that organization, or if you can't, I think you need to leave it. So part of that has to do with values and understanding your values. I think you've got to be smart, you have to be tireless, inquisitive, and I think you have to keep an open mind. If you don't keep an open mind, go back to my example of, my example of a bad situation. Despite evidence provided, that person could not keep an open mind, and so led down a road that took a poor set of conclusions. I think you have to be, as well, you have to be engaging. This doesn't mean you have to be an extrovert, okay? But you have to be willing to engage, because if your only means of observation, or your only means of reporting and collecting information is what you observe, you're never going to reach your potential. You've got to be able to pull some of that out of others. And so, you know, the skill with how you do research and how you understand what's going on background, and then you understand the person you're dealing with, then you can potentially get the right effect by asking a question a certain way, or coming back at it, or going to other sources, those kinds of things. But first and foremost, I think you got to work again to build trust and maintain a sense of truth to your values.
Were there any points in time during either the Iraq War or the Vietnam War where you felt that maintaining your values as a member of the military was a problem?
Yeah, well, first let me be clear. I was not. I mean, I did go to Vietnam a lot when I was working on the POW MIA mission, but that was in the 1990s. So I didn't serve during the war in Vietnam. So just let's look at the last 10 years in Iraq. I struggled. Where I struggled with my own values was in my relationship with the Iraqi security forces. Because I served with them a number of times, they did not have, especially early on, they did not have the same values that I did. My job was to help make them better. But if I wanted to be successful in helping to make them better, I had to understand their culture. I'll give you a brief example. Corruption. Okay, from an American frame of reference, corruption is bad in any shape, color, or form. We don't tolerate it. I mean, it does happen, even in our country, but we all universally think this is a bad thing. With the people who I was working with in Iraq, many of whom, again, had learned over 35 years of Ba'ath Party rule, if I wanted to care for my family, I needed to do things a certain way. Corruption was fairly rampant. Okay, so I had to learn, I had to try to see things through their perspective. And what's interesting is when you do, there's a lot less black and white and a lot more gray. So if I was advising an officer who is in charge of security, we call it the Department of Border Enforcement. Think of it as Iraqi Border Patrol on the Iranian border, trying to maintain the sanctity of the border and keeping people from coming across or smuggling goods or people in, those kinds of things. Corruption is kind of a way of life on the border. And it goes back thousands of years, and the people of the tribes, the same tribes on both sides of the border, they don't see it as smuggling. To them, it's business. It's just how business has been done. Well, the guys that are in charge of the security there, if they shake somebody down or they take a tax or whatever from those people, from an American perspective, that's just wrong. That's corruption. Okay, but what if his intent, what if that guy's intent and what he's doing with that money is feeding his soldiers? Because the government apparatus isn't good enough to actually care for his soldiers. What if he's doing that? Is it okay then? I don't know. But what I learned from it is, there's a lot more gray than there is black and white. And so it would be easy for me to come in and say, do things this way because I'm an American and this is what my values are. But that wouldn't necessarily be right. And I wouldn't have necessarily the right effect I was looking for.
I kind of want to know how many people are in a brigade division and like context around the size of the organizations.
Okay. Well, I don't mean to give you an organization lesson here, but I'll start with the Corps, and just kind of top down. So I'm the deputy commander of a Corps, and it's commanded by a 3-star general. And usually, Corps can vary in size, but usually somewhere between 50 and 150,000 people. Pretty big organization. A division usually it's commanded by a 2-star like myself, general, and they typically have somewhere between 15 and 25,000 people. The next level down is a brigade, and it's commanded by a colonel, like Colonel Johnson at the back of the room. And brigades generally have about 3,000 or 4,000 people. And Dave, how long have you been in the Army now?
Sir, 24 years, sir.
24 years. So that maybe will give you, for that level of commander or that level of leader, 24 years in the Army and about 3,000 or 4,000 people. And then we go to a battalion, about 700, commanded by a lieutenant colonel. Again, 15 to 20 years service. Captain Allgaier back here just finished being a company commander. He's a graduate of OSU, in fact, 2005 grad. And how many people were in your company, Jesse?
160 people.
160 people in his company. Down below that, the newest on the officer side that we have, so fresh graduates from OSU are lieutenants. They usually lead a platoon of 30 to 40 folks. When you get to be at my level, you won't be successful if you try to command a company at the corps level. So, it changes a lot over time, and you have to learn to look deeper and have a lot more patience, because it takes a lot more time and energy to change the direction of an organization the larger it gets. So,
yeah, I was wondering if you could comment on the whole social media explosion, and maybe with regards to strategic communication and trust,
right,
how that has shaped things, and
wow,
what it bodes for the future relationship between press and military.
I am going to ask you guys to bear with me, because this is potentially, I don't want to make it a long answer, but I think it's going to have to be a little bit, because it's got different aspects. First of all, social media is how you all communicate. Where's your watch?
My watch? It's on my cell phone.
Exactly. Okay? Now, people like me, I am not a digital native. Okay, so, and I know that some of you wear watches. Achille over here is wearing a watch, but he's probably on the borderline. How old are you, Achille?
39.
Okay, so he's a good bit younger than me, but he's on the border, but also in the military, you don't have very good cell phone coverage in Afghanistan, so you get used to wearing a watch. It's a good telltale sign, though. That's the world you grew up in. Okay, now when people like me want to communicate with people of your age, what are some, I'm just going to ask a question, what do you think some of the breakdowns or the pitfalls are? I mean, if the way I communicate with you is by lecturing you, how positive is that? How well do you receive that? Okay, not very well. That's not how you communicate. That's not how you communicate with each other. And so, I'm going to go back to Captain Allgaier here. What's the average age of the folks? Yeah, I know you're not wearing a watch. What's the average age of the folks in your company?
Average age folks in my company? Oh, probably between 18 and 23.
Okay. And how did they communicate?
Cell phone, Facebook.
So if he relied only on him in the what I would call the transmission mode, him lecturing other people, or he's going to put out something and not receive it, and his means of putting it out. In my case, if I relied solely on radio and television, who am I going to reach? The people who listen to the radio and watch TV, which is not necessarily the people we want to reach. So I think that when you look at the world, you have to understand how the world communicates. And as a leader, if you want to communicate with an audience, you need to understand that audience and figure out how they communicate, and then be able to operate in that sphere. And so if I need to communicate with a bunch of 18 to 23-year-old soldiers, I've got to figure out how do I reach out to them. Probably through Twitter, Facebook, or something like that. It's not going to be just me lecturing to them, because that's not how they communicate, and they're going to turn it off. Communication requires not just a receipt of information and understanding, but hopefully some information going in both directions. The real power, I think, of social media is it allows a conversation. If we are at my last job as a spokesman for Iraq. And again, we're going back to what I'm comfortable with versus what I should be comfortable with. If we go back to that job, I would do a lot of interviews. You know, I was on C-SPAN or spend time on CNN, Al Jazeera, which is interesting interviews, by the way. But I did a lot of interviews, and these things they would show up on TV, or they would show up in print, etc. But that was all transmission. Now, the real power of social media is we can take one of those stories from an interview I did, put it on my Facebook page, and then, hey, have at it. Now what we've got is a conversation. Because what's your name? Ellie. So if Ellie says, I think you're full of crap, and here's why, now we've got a conversation going. I have a choice. Am I just going to leave that out there? Or am I going to say, well, let's talk about it. Why do you think that? Or whatever. We get a conversation going. And what's your name?
Joe.
Joe. So if Joe is reading that, he doesn't even have to be part of the conversation, but he can learn from it. That's where I think the real power of social media is. Now, I'm going to be honest. A lot of people my age are scared by it. And I'm not comfortable in operating. I don't do it intuitively like all of you, but I think it's very, very important. So, but because people are scared by it, I think we're missing a lot of opportunities. And in the reporting side, I will tell you one thing that I'm not scared about, but there is a concern out there. And it has to do with lack of control. For the written press, you know, for television reporters, radio, anytime I did a thing with NPR, I knew that I was dealing with a professional. And there's an edit, you know, if somebody was going to do something out of whack, there's an editorial board, there's this reputation that's all important, but there's you know, journalism is a profession. And as a profession, you know, the people who are reporters impose standards on themselves, and they maintain control so that we can in fact have that trust. But when you get into the blogosphere, there's a lot less control. Anybody can have a blog, anybody can write about something, and there's not necessarily the same controls or standards that are applied to it. So I did do interviews with bloggers, but that was actually controlled. Because what I did was, it was a group of bloggers that would join with Department of Defense, and they'd essentially been vetted. And it doesn't mean that they're gonna echo my messages or anything like that, but it means that they're going to be trusted to report what they heard or what they think, instead of make complete lies up, which can happen. Ma'am.
There's an idea, especially in social media in our age group, that people are lazier. So if someone reads one article, you kind of have the telephone system, and that 8 people down the road, it's totally jumbled. How does that affect the soldiers in the military and people in the military and what they understand?
Well,
how they appreciate media?
Oh, thanks. As far as the specifics on social media, I think it's out there, but I think from a military organizational perspective, we are able to communicate, but there's a responsibility on the guys like myself who are commanders. I've got to know what's out there, and I've got to make some decisions about whether I want to engage that conversation or whether I want to correct things. But I can't say I'm going to have a Facebook page and then just put it out there and then not pay a lot of attention to it. Because if I'm going to do it, I have to invest a lot of my time and personal energy. And I'll be honest with you, when I was in Iraq, I had some digital natives that I used to help alert me to things, because they were very intuitive. They would look and they would figure out how things were connected to other types, you know, rather than just the Facebook page I was starting with. But again, I think there's a responsibility to sort of ensure, if you put it out there, you're going to own it one way or the other. So I think that that's an important aspect of it. Yeah.
Do you think
Joe.
the social media aspect could ruin the security of the mission in a way?
Yeah, this is one of the toughest things tension-wise between the military. I mean, I'm glad you brought this up. One of the greatest tensions between what the press wants in the world we live in today, and it's exacerbated by social media, but it's not just that, is the press wants information now. They want to be there the first, and they want to be there the first with the truth. They're not looking to report something that's false, but they want to know facts now. And in our particular case, sometimes something has happened. We know what has happened. We don't want to share that. And it's not, I'm not talking about bad news kinds of things, but we don't want to share things because of what is coming next, or the operational security. We don't want to get the information out about a particular operation, especially if there's going to be the next phase, and we might compromise it. So there's this tension. Let me tell you a quick story. I'll give you two quick examples from my time as a spokesman. We had a case in Anbar province, not a happy place, in the western side of Iraq, where we had a mission, a special operations force. The mission went awry, and there was some civilians killed in a firefight. The reporters came out with information which was half. There were some facts there. Most of the facts were not correct. They were asking us, for the details, but based on what was still happening, I couldn't share the details. Basically, what I was saying was, well, there's an incident. We know there's been loss of life. Operation is still ongoing, and we'll get back to you when we can. So when that happens, it's not necessarily social media, but the point is, the reporter wants to know now. For all the reasons, not just because they really want to know now, but there's pressure from producers and everybody else to get this information. I'm paying you to get the story now, so I want it now. That, if not handled correctly, can erode trust. But they didn't get what they were looking for me. Now here's the other side of it, or a different aspect of it. From September 1st or so of 2010 until we left in December of 2011, the Iraqi security forces were in charge of security. In some cases, I knew exactly what had happened. And in this case, I just gave you with the special ops forces. We didn't really know what had happened. We got some initial reports, but initial reports are usually wrong, which is another reason why we're reluctant to say here's what happened unless we really know what happened. But in some cases, we knew exactly what happened on things, but I was reluctant to say, well, here's what happened. Why? Because the Iraqi security forces were in charge of security. And if I said, well, here's what happened with this Iraqi force or whatever, even if we had 100% knowledge, what I was doing is undercutting their credibility. And so go back to that idea of a relationship between the military and the press. I was trying to teach my Iraqi counterparts, hey, you need to engage the press. You need to tell them what went on here. But if I do it for them, then I'm undercutting it. And it was working against the bigger purpose.
First of all, thank you, sir, for taking the time to come out and speak with us. I'm curious what your thoughts are on how student veterans who make up a significant population of this university can begin establishing that relationship of trust with the future members of the press, some of which who are sitting here today.
Yeah, oh, well, I think get to know them. I mean, if you go back to my prescription, if you will, there's no rocket science behind this, by the way, but understand the culture, help them understand where you have come from and why, work hard to build a relationship, and then admit mistakes if you have them. And then maintain your values. I think it's the right thing to do. Now let me just say one thing. I think that individual relationships are ultimately what help us break down stereotypes. Okay, so I know we have some. Who in here is a veteran today? Okay, so we got some veterans in the crowd. Thanks. And people have stereotypes of you. Okay. I mean, how many of you, especially if you're a recent returnee from Iraq or Afghanistan, how many of you want other people to feel sorry for you? You know, none of you, probably. You know, but there's stereotypes out there. Okay, so I think what, you know, and the onus on you is to establish personal relationships so you can break down those stereotypes. And the same thing goes with relationships with reporters. You know, don't be, if you're in the military, don't be, or a veteran, don't be scared of reporters. Build a relationship and get to know that person. And then, you know, you can probably learn a lot more and have a positive influence on both organizations in the future. Sir.
You mentioned operational security a bit ago. There's a video on YouTube called Dishonorable Disclosures. I don't know if you've seen that video.
Dishonorable
Disclosures, and it talks about the leaking of information and jeopardizing missions that are still underway. I didn't know if you had seen that or had any comments on whether those claims were valid.
I haven't seen it, but I can take what's probably our most, I'll just comment a little bit on what's probably our most famous leak, infamous leak recently, which is the WikiLeaks event. And I know that the soldier in question is in the legal process. I'm not going to talk about the specifics of whether or not he did it. You know, he's alleged to have done it and everything. But I can tell you that the impact on the trust that we had with our partners in Iraq, or really around the world, was huge. Because there was this, ultimately what was leaked and what was shared with the world was a lot of secret classified documents, many of them State Department documents, you know, making judgments about other people, whether there were, you know, people in other countries, etc. And since that was leaked and that got out there, that caused an erosion in that trust. And it also caused an erosion in the trust between the State Department and the military. Again, I was serving in Iraq at the time. We had unique classified email systems that we can't even talk to each other on the basic system from the military side and the State Department side. But what we could have was we could have a State Department computer at our desk so we could talk on their system. They could talk on ours. We had a little issue with complete sharing of information. But when WikiLeaks happened and when we saw this huge explosion of information, there's a lot more reluctance to give the military access to the State Department information. So it can have a far-reaching effect. And this is more of a strategic thing that happened over a period of years rather than a tactical example that happened in a certain firefight. But anyway, it is important. Okay, any others? All right, well look, I think we've about used up the time. I want to thank each one of you for what you're doing here. I don't care if you're a veteran, a student, a faculty member, but what you're doing is real important. And every one of you plays an important role in the future of our country. And I just ask you to take the full advantage of the opportunities you have. Not everybody in the world has the opportunities you have. To take full advantage of them and make a difference and work to build trust. Anyway, thanks for everything.